many unanswered questions, but we know they answered a big one by firing Matt Rule. You know, Baker Mayfield has struggled through another pick six, and now you mention it. He's got the ankle injury, the foot injury. X-rays were negative, but he's going to have an MRI today.
There's no strategy. I have no strategy. There's zero strategy.
This was the perfect time for me to make this video because we've been planning an update video on Baker Mayfield for quite some time. And given how I just made a video on the direction and trajectory of the Denver Broncos season, now that the Carolina Panthers finally fired their brand new head coach, Matt Rule, it's time we discuss everything there is to do with the Carolina Panthers, primarily Baker Mayfield, the Matt Rule firing, and where this team is trending as a result of their recent decisions. So before we get to the content, we upload shorter versions of this content onto my Instagram and onto my TikTok account. Now that we got all that out of the way, break! Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? The Carolina Panthers have been a very interesting scenario over the past couple of years. I mean, the very end of the Cam Newton and Ron Rivera era is where this all started, and to be honest, it was a situation that I understood fully. I mean, the relationship with Ron Rivera and Cam Newton has officially run its course. Cam Newton was clearly trending downward as a result of recent injuries that he has sustained, so it made sense for the Carolina Panthers to bring in fresh blood. Maybe they hit on the next groundbreaking college football head coach to successfully transition into the NFL. And they thought they had that with Matt Rule. Now, I'm going to divide this video into multiple parts. Obviously, I'd be doing you guys a huge injustice if we didn't start with the Matt Rule firing and essentially what went wrong, because the Carolina Panthers are a very unique case. Typically, in situations like this, when a team is as bad as the Carolina Panthers, there's dysfunction on every single level of the organization. The Panthers aren't like that. They've actually made some sound decisions over the past year. Unfortunately, the way they decided to handle specific situations resulted in the demise of some of their personnel, whether that's at the quarterback position with Baker Mayfield or at the head coaching position with Matt Rule. Now look, I'm not going to let Matt Rule completely off the hook in this video, but I will play the devil's advocate in this instance because there are things that I believe the Panthers could have done to set Matt Rule up a little bit better, but at the same time, there were multiple problems with the Matt Rule era. It's really easy to just look at Matt Rule's record and just automatically assume he's a horrific head coach. The problem with Matt Rule primarily came with the fact that he wasn't able to bring what he did in college with him to the NFL. And this is a harsh reality that many NFL coaches or former college football coaches end up having to accept, whether it's Chip Kelly and his super fast, quote unquote, revolutionary offense, all the way to Urban Meyer and his inability to get a reaction out of his players after treating them essentially like college football students. It just doesn't work, and it's a mistake that gets made over and over again, and it's going to continue to get made in the future. The Carolina Panthers offense has been anemic during Matt Rule's entire tenure with the team, and to give you an idea of how anemic it was, Matt Rule is 1-27 when his opponent has scored 17 or more points. Now, for context, the Chicago Bears are averaging over 17 points per game. And the Chicago Bears aren't necessarily the greatest offense in the NFL, no offense to them. In defense of Matt Rule, I will admit, he never really had a true starting QB. I mean, he had Teddy Bridgewater, who is a fantastic journeyman quarterback, and I'm shocked at how many playbooks this man has learned up until this point in his career. He's had PJ Walker, the former XFL MVP, who he also coached at Temple. He had Sam Darnold, who performed really well during the first 4 games of last season before starting to look like Sam Darnold again. When Sam Darnold got injured, the Carolina Panthers brought in Cam Newton, and that didn't necessarily work out so well either until they finally decided to move on to Baker Mayfield this year, which we're going to get to him in just a sec. And to be honest, I was starting to have faith in the Matt Rule era during during the very beginning of Sam Darnold's career with the Carolina Panthers before the wheels started falling off. At the end of the day, I think the Panthers made the right decision here. You have the opportunity to evaluate Steve Wilks, who, if you don't know who he is, he was the Arizona Cardinals head coach during the 2018 NFL season, the one year that they had Josh Rosen at quarterback. They were so bad that they got the #1 overall pick, and then they eventually ended up selecting Kyler Murray the following draft, which I did tweet out. It'd be hilarious if the Carolina Panthers brought in Josh Rosen to compete with Baker Mayfield, the #1 overall pick, and Sam Darnold, the #3 overall pick in that same draft, to see who would be the starting QB for the Carolina Panthers, because Baker Mayfield at this point has sustained an injury. Now at this point, the plan for the Carolina Panthers is just to see what they have in Steve Wilks, but I would say more likely than not, if they weren't already doing this, they need to launch a full-scale rebuild. Currently, that's what they are doing, by the way. Teams are calling about DJ Moore, apparently. They have some remarkable talent on that team that they could definitely get some draft capital for in return, and they could begin tanking for top picks and rebuilding that way. So far, Scott Fitterer has shown me mixed results as a general manager. I mean, last year, I did like the decision to trade for Stephon Gilmore, to trade for CJ Henderson. You didn't really have to give up that much for a former top cornerback prospect that barely played any games in the NFL. I did like the selection of JC Horn. I did think that he was starting something good, at least on the defensive side of the ball for the Carolina Panthers. But at the same time, I didn't like the way he decided to handle the quarterback situation. Going from one castaway QB to another, to another, to another wasn't necessarily the best way to help your college football head coach transition into the NFL. Now, the most recent example of this is none other than Baker Mayfield. I made a documentary on Baker Mayfield. If you want to hear his whole story, it's called The Biggest Underdog in Sports. Baker Mayfield is in a very bad situation currently. I mean, he was in a horrific situation prior to this upcoming season, but the situation just got way worse for him, in the sense that this man played himself up to the #1 overall pick in the 2018 NFL draft. John Dorsey and the Cleveland Browns decided to go all in on a man that could potentially win some games just based on the fact that he just seemed like a winner, which, by the way, is a horrific reason to draft anyone at all whatsoever, but I digress. Because it's not like selecting Sam Darnold with the #1 overall pick would have done him any better, and to be honest, I don't think selecting Josh Allen with the top pick would have done them anything as well, because Josh Allen was perceived as a project, and I don't view the Cleveland Browns as a team that is capable of completing any projects at all, at least not back in those days. And to Baker's credit, I've said this multiple times, to his credit, he has performed really well for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, arguably the best quarterback that they've had in the past 2 decades. And what's interesting is Baker Mayfield's situation reminds me of another #1 overall pick that was a quarterback that's won a Heisman during his collegiate years that ended up getting moved on from once a better quarterback option came around, Jameis Winston. I mean, if you look at Jameis Winston's situation, the top pick in the 2014 NFL draft and the top pick in the 2018 NFL draft, Baker Mayfield situation, they're very similar in the sense that Jameis Winston had remarkable weapons to throw to. He had a head coach that clearly knew what he was doing, because he would eventually win a Super Bowl, and has had a pedigree with established quarterbacks in the past like Carson Palmer and Andrew Luck. And to Jameis Winston's credit, he didn't perform so horribly. He threw for over 5,000 passing yards in his lone season with Bruce Arians in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He threw for 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions. He had weapons like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to throw the football to. But once Tom Brady became available, obviously the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to move on from Jameis Winston. You already given the man a good 5 years to prove himself. And although Baker Mayfield had a shorter leash, you have a quarterback on a rookie scale contract, you essentially go all in on him, build him a remarkable supporting cast, and see how far he could take you. And if he could take you as far as you're expecting, then maybe you re-sign him and he's your guy for the future. And if not, then obviously you move on from him. Good examples of this, and teams that are currently doing this, are the Miami Dolphins, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Los Angeles Chargers, all teams with quarterbacks on a rookie scale contract that went all in on building remarkable supporting casts around those QBs. And for the most part, you could say it's yielded positive results so far. I mean, at least prior to the Tua concussion, it did. In the Cleveland Browns case, case, they did just that. They traded for Odell Beckham Jr., they signed Jarvis Juice Landry, they signed Jadeveon Clowney, they brought in Kareem Hunt, they built a really good offensive line. They were so committed to Baker Mayfield that they elevated his QB coach after they let go of Hugh Jackson. When Baker Mayfield underperformed in his lone season with Freddie Kitchens, they decided, okay, it was the coach's fault. It wasn't Baker's fault. Let's get him Kevin Stefanski. And he performed pretty well with Kevin Stefanski. I mean, if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, you have to admit that victory versus the Pittsburgh Steelers 2 years ago in the playoffs had to have been one of the most exhilarating moments as a Cleveland Browns fan in quite some time. Baker would then come back, play his season with a hurt shoulder, and since the Browns took a gigantic step back, they already had a gigantic sample size to evaluate Baker Mayfield. Is he the guy moving forward? The answer clearly was no, especially once they decided to throw an insane amount of money at Deshaun Watson. I mean, again, Deshaun Watson didn't want to go to Cleveland. It was that fully guaranteed contract that changed his mind. So Baker then gets traded to the Carolina Panthers. Now, I think the way this was handled was horrific on Baker's part. I mean, I think his pride just completely destroyed any opportunity for him to prove his doubters wrong, or at least secure a good contract or convince a team that he could be a superstar or a quarterback that is worthy of starting for your team. Because if he had stayed on the Cleveland Browns and said, okay, this sucks, but I'm going to just come to work, do my duty, and hit free agency at the end of the season, which is what he could have done, then he would have returned to the Cleveland Browns, assuming that he would be fully healthy. He would have been the starting QB while they waited for Deshaun Watson. He would have played his sample size of games, I mean, maybe 12 games, now fully healthy in a system that he is very fully accustomed to, with a significantly better supporting cast than he has in Carolina. Once Deshaun Watson comes back and the Browns finish their season, Baker could hit free agency, and at that point, I personally think he would have convinced a team to take a chance on him moving forward, and he could have his pick of whatever team is in need of a quarterback or a bridge quarterback. The way Baker decided to handle the situation was the moment the Cleveland Browns were even interested in Deshaun Watson, not even trading for Deshaun Watson. I mean, the moment they declared some sort of interest in him, this is before Deshaun Watson rejected the Cleveland Browns that first time around, Baker Mayfield posted this overly dramatic post onto Instagram, thanking the city of Cleveland and saying that they need to part ways at this point. And for some reason, he felt like it would be better to force himself all the way to the Carolina Panthers than to stay with the Cleveland Browns and be their backup for one more year. And I don't mean to hate, man, but none of this surprises me. I mean, you're talking about a man that was traded to the Carolina Panthers in the beginning of July. Baker Mayfield would get named the week 1 starter a month and a half later. And so far, he has performed so freaking horribly with the Carolina Panthers. It's so disgusting how bad it's been, and it's about to get way, way, way worse. Which, by the way, which general manager in their right mind thinks that a trio of Baker Mayfield at quarterback, Ben McAdoo at offensive coordinator, and Matt Rule at head coach is going to result in success? Because so far, Baker Mayfield's only completed 55% of his throws, has won 1 game, has thrown 4 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and now he has a brand new head coach in the middle of the season. Now, granted, he's dealt with this before in his rookie year with the Cleveland Browns when they fired Hugh Jackson throughout the season and replaced him with Greg Williams. But at this point, man, what do you think the end result of this season is going to be for Baker? Just looking at his body of work, if you look at the way his teammates have treated him, I mean, if you even go back to the Odell Beckham Jr. situation a year ago, nobody's ever come out and stood up for Baker Mayfield. None of his teammates or wide receivers come out and speak up for him. Nobody's excited to play with him. If you remember, Robbie Anderson was miserable at the idea of the Carolina Panthers trading for Baker Mayfield. Eventually, he became a professional and came around at the end. But to summarize everything for the Carolina Panthers and for Baker Mayfield, you have a horrific body of work for Baker this season so far. You have the fact that he has just sustained an ankle sprain and he's going to be out for a couple of weeks. You have the fact that his head coach is now fired and that his contract is expired. He is 27 years old, and I really don't know how it could get better for him. I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel for him. He wasn't able to do it with a good supporting cast in Cleveland. He's not going to be able to get it done in the circumstances he's in Carolina. So what is the rest of his career going to look like? Is some team going to give him another chance like Carson Wentz? I don't think so. I mean, maybe if you're a team that's tanking, possibly. But at the end of the day, it's time to accept Baker Mayfield for what he is. And that's just an average QB that can manage games, especially if he you have a good stable of running backs that could stay healthy. If you're the Carolina Panthers, for the love of God, try to trade for Gardner Minshew. I mean, he does not deserve to be a backup. I mean, I would take him over Baker Mayfield, but I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. Do you think this is it for Baker? Because I really don't see him starting for any team at all whatsoever next year. Hell, maybe even this year. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.